I welcome all the participants from India and abroad to this international webinar on enhancing English language skills. I wish a good morning, a good afternoon, and a good evening to everyone according to your different time zones. And on behalf of Indians, a special namaste to our international participants. At the outset, I would like
Wow.
to thank our management committee of the Matru Seva Sangh for helping us to organize this webinar. This world, we have been battling the pandemic caused by the coronavirus for the last couple of months. It has been engaging our minds, and we all are working towards slowing its spread and resume our life back to normalcy. But along with this, we also need to carry on with our teaching learning process. Hence, this webinar has been organized with a view to dwell for some time on an important topic, which is which concerns us all, enhancing English language skills. This English language is an important link that binds us all. We can communicate with each other irrespective of our nationality and language. Hence, it becomes important for us to learn and discuss the finer aspects of the skills required to communicate in this language. And Matru Seva Sangh always has been organizing such programs in order to work towards striving excellence. Hence, this webinar has been organized. And to our good fortune, we have a wonderful resource person, Mr. Joel Walcott. It is my privilege and honor to introduce him before this August gathering, this renowned speaker, teacher, language coach. Mr. Joel Walcott holds a master's degree in curriculum and instruction, as well as has teaching license for English as a second language and Spanish. He majored in sociology and Spanish and had the pleasure of studying abroad in Europe, Spain. He has taught English for more than 10 years and has helped students from all over the world to improve their English skills. He has taught in Milwaukee School of Engineering. In addition to tutoring, he teaches online courses and gives workshops on teacher training and professional development. He started Learn Now, Learn Well with the desire to teach others about language and culture and develop professionally and help others achieve their goals. He is the CEO of Learn Now, Learn Well, which focuses primarily on increasing English proficiency, including business and casual English skills. He uses the following thought as his mantra. I believe the purpose of education, tutoring, is to not only learn specific content, but also to grow as a person, to gain major strides towards achieving your goals. The experience he has gained from teaching has been invaluable to him, and he is with us to share from this rich treasure of experience. We welcome you, sir, and we are really, really fortunate that you have joined us for this webinar. But before we begin our session, I would invite our principal, Dr. Jyoti Nisware, for her introductory remarks. Over to Dr. Jyoti.
Thank you, Dr. Nandita. Good evening to all Indian participants. Good morning to the participants belongs to abroad, USA. Hello. Good evening to all the Indian participants over here. Good morning to the participants from abroad. I welcome all of you present here for this virtual international webinar on enhancing English language skills organized by Matru Seva Sangh Institute of Social Work. Your participants, I would like to give a brief about the organization. The Matru Seva Sangh was founded by both Padma Shri Kamla Bai Prospect Alumni in 1921. The institute was founded in 1958. This institute is affiliated to Rashtra Sant Tukaji Maharaj Nagpur University and it is affiliated with the aim of the institute is to provide professional education in social work, to develop the civic sense and consciousness and civic social responsibility among the students, to train the students for a wide range of social work intervention at various levels in the field of social welfare, plus completing research in fieldwork student activities by various field action projects. Our institute provides programs of study such as Bachelor in Social Work BSW program, Master in Social Work, that is MSW program. We have PhD social work, short-term course in communicative English, short-term course in research methodology, postgraduate certificate course in counseling. During this pandemic period, we have been organizing number of webinars, national and international, on several issues of our concern. Today, we have with us our esteemed international speaker, Mr. Joel Wackett. He's CEO and tutoring specialist from USA. We are privileged to have him here for this international webinar. Dear participants, the importance of English is on rise, and with the explosion of information in all the fields of education, English remains the only means in the end of the information. And therefore, we thought that the poor English and lack of basic language skills deprives any student or any individual from benefiting and benefiting. One of the smartest investments in the future is learning speaking, reading, and writing. These are the four macro skills of language. All skills we have to focus on all these four skills, like ability to recognize the sounds, words and sentence when spoken, learn the active speaking skills are equally important. Ability to pronounce ability to express oneself correctly, ability to speak correctly, fluently, confidently, properly in informal and formal contexts, ability to put the ideas and because ability to understand word relationships is very important. Ability to understand words in context is important. Reading fluently and understand them, very important. Writing skill is equally important because these are the four important areas of learning the language. Ability to spell words, construct correct grammatical sentences by using appropriate vocabulary. Ability to draft letters and other official correspondence, that is equal importance in today's life. Ability to argue, defend, explain, discuss, express are these important points which carries a lot of importance in writing skill. Selecting right word for right phrase is equally important. And we also believe that we should encourage the students towards creative language, creative and writing. And therefore, this webinar, we feel that it's very important and carries a lot of significance for students, for scholars, and for academicians to understand the the importance of language and how English can be enhanced, for their day-to-day activities, academic activities, or in their professional careers. Today we have with us Mr. Joel Walcott. He is an eminent person, and we are really happy to have him here as our speaker. He's the international person, and it's a great pleasure to have him with us today. On this occasion, I am grateful to our management for having been always supportive, consistently supportive. Their guidance is always with us. I also appreciate and congratulate the convener of this international webinar, Dr. Nandita Mane. She is the HOD of our English department. And the entire organizing committee. We have Ms. Payal Samadkar, then Dr. Prince Agache, he is the librarian of our institute, and Mr. Gajanan Netam, who is the faculty, the guest faculty of the institute. I appreciate and congratulate all of them for their consistent hard work during this series of webinars we are organizing. We have many more webinars coming in next few days, and I hope we will get equal number of response from all of you. I have learned from our for my organizing committee that we have received about 700, at least 700 registration for this international webinar. And it's a great pleasure to have you all with us today. And let us join for the webinar. Let us begin with it. And I hand over this to Dr. Nandita Mane for further proceeding. Thank you, all of you. Wish you all the best. I'm sure this is going to be enriching and enlightening experience and webinar for all of you. Thank you very much. All the best.
Thank you, madam. Truly said, this is indeed going to be a rich experience for us. And now I invite Mr. Joel Walcott to begin his presentation on enhancing English language skills. Mr. Joel.
So first of all, thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen with you in just 1 second.
Yes. Hello.
Sorry, Nandita, I'm wondering if you could help me out with these sort of lines right here.
These lines can be removed.
I apologize for this, everybody.
Fine, you can begin. That's not a problem. You can begin with your presentation. Yeah.
Sounds good. Okay, so first of all, good morning. Well, I guess good evening to you all there. It's morning here still. I want to start by thanking you all for joining. In particular, I want to thank the Matsushima Sang Institute of Social Work. I'm very honored to be here. I'm very excited to be to have you all participating in our webinar today. There's a lot of English skills that I'm going to be teaching you today. There's a lot of very important strategies that I'm going to be sharing with you. And during all of this webinar and this presentation, I do encourage you to participate. There's going to be certain times where I'm going to ask you some questions. And I would really like you to, to share any questions that you do have during the webinar. And we will definitely have time at the end for additional question and answer as well. So again, I just want to start by saying thank you all very much for inviting me here. And I'm really excited to get started. Okay. First of all, a little bit of background about me. I do have a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. So essentially teaching. I went for my teaching degree among a few other things. And so I do have my master's degree in teaching. I do have a bachelor's degree in sociology and Spanish. And so I know sociology isn't the same thing as social work. There are many things that are similar. And so I'll be addressing that in a little bit. But I do speak Spanish, and I do want to point that out because what that means is that I'm also bilingual. So I understand what it's like for you to have to speak in another language, to have to read and write in another language, to have to think and, I don't know, maybe dream in another language. And so I think that's something that's very, very important because I can relate to you and I understand what it's like. And which is all the more reason that I want to prepare you with these additional English abilities and skills as well. So I have taught English for over 10 years. You know, I hope to do it for many more years as well. I have taught Spanish for over 5 years. I also have experience in career coaching. So I've worked for a few colleges and I've done career coaching. And so essentially what that means is helping people look for jobs, helping people write their resume or network, interviewing, things like that. And so that is something that I do have quite a bit of experience in as well. Currently, I work as a software consultant for an educational technology company. I currently live in Austin, Texas, but we do actually have an office in Chandigarh, and so hopefully one day I can visit India. I'd love to do that. I started Learn Now, Learn Well, my organization, in 2017, so I've been doing this for 3 years. And primarily we focus on English tutoring and online courses. So a little bit about my company, Learn Now, Learn Well. As I mentioned before, we focus a lot on English courses, specifically vocabulary, grammar, things like reading and writing and listening comprehension. All of these things I'm going to be talking about in our webinar today. How to improve your fluency, pronunciation, accents. I also talk a lot about culture during my tutoring sessions. And then I also offer online courses, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes later on. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about today specifically is, as I mentioned, we're going to start by talking about reading. Okay, so I'm going to give you some helpful tips how to improve your reading comprehension. We're going to take a look at a reading sample. I'm also going to kind of do a practice reading activity with you, just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, how you can use those skills to improve your reading. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about writing skills. How do you improve your writing skills? What is the purpose of what you're writing? We're going to take a look at some materials that I've created, some helpful tools. And then we're going to take a look a little bit closer in terms of conversational English, how you're able to improve that fluency, both in listening, but more specifically in speaking. And then finally, I'm going to give you a list of helpful references that you can use going forward. And then also, as I mentioned, we're going to leave time at the very end for Q&A. Okay, so as I mentioned, the first thing that we're going to be talking about is reading. So what I would like to start with is by asking you a question. So how many hours do you spend reading in English each day, more or less on average? And so if you could please put your answers in the chat, that is how we will be taking a look at these answers specifically. And it's okay. I mean, I want you to be honest. Maybe it's 0. That's okay. Okay, excellent. So I'm seeing about a range. It looks like more or less a lot of people about 2 hours. Some are a little bit more, 5 or 6. Okay, mostly 3, mostly 2. Okay, excellent, great. Well, thank you all. So that's good to know, about 2 hours in English every day. I think, you know, the more that you can read in English, the better it's going to be for you. I know everyone's busy, people have a lot of things going on. And so I think 2 hours is actually a very good amount of time, especially again, to be really focusing on a lot of things English related as you do read. Okay, so what are some examples of things you read? There's many different things. I have some images here. Just for example, you know, obviously people think of sort of books as the traditional way of reading. That has changed quite a bit. Now people read on their laptops, on their computers, Kindles, e-readers, people read magazines, newspapers. There's, you know, we could list 1,000 things that people read. Really what I do encourage you is that just read. It doesn't really matter a whole lot what it is. I think the more practice that you can get, the better it's going to be for you. Okay, so whether it's reading a traditional book, if it's a Kindle that you have, your laptop, maybe even just reading on your phone, all that is experience. And if you think about it, like most of you said, that you read about 2 hours in English each day, well, 2 hours times 7 days a week, you know, times weeks, times months, that's a lot of practice for you. So I definitely do encourage you to continue doing that. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm going to give you several strategies for improving your reading comprehension. Okay, I think many of you received an outline that was, I believe, emailed to you or perhaps put in the app earlier on. And so that's sort of the outline that I'm going to be taking throughout this presentation. I always encourage my students to take notes. You know, this is being recorded, I do believe. Yeah, so I believe we'll be able to share this later on, but I always do encourage everyone to take notes, especially if there's certain things that you think, oh, this is new, that's a really good idea, I think I want to start doing that, okay? So let's take a look at these strategies. First of all, previewing. Taking a look at what you're reading, not for specific details, but just to understand the main idea. So whether it's reading a news article or if you're reading an assignment for your class, it's always very helpful to just take a look at it in general. A word that we often use is the word skim, S-K-I-M. Some of you might be familiar with that word. Some of you, this might be the first time, but essentially what skim means is to just look, to do this exactly, to preview. So to look at something very quickly, get the main idea, so that way you mentally prepare yourself for what you're going to be reading for that specific assignment. A second strategy is to use context clues. So context clues means the information within the reading itself. Okay, now with this particular strategy, I'm talking really kind of more or less about vocabulary words, not the entire reading, but really just 1 or 2 words within a sentence. Okay, so let's take a look at this example here. So the example is, the man seemed loquacious and didn't stop talking. Okay, so if you take a look at this sentence, the man seemed loquacious, you might be thinking, what does the word loquacious mean? I'll be honest, it's not a common word. I myself did not know this word until, until I was an adult, because it's not something that's used often. So if you come in a situation where you find something like this and you think, I have no idea what this means, of course you can look it up right away, right? And that's a good strategy. However, you can use context clues to try to figure out what the word means. So for example, the word loquacious, it's an adjective, it follows a verb, and it's directly describing the man. The man seemed loquacious, okay? So it's an adjective describing him. Moreover, if you use the rest of the sentence, didn't stop talking, this essentially tells us that loquacious means someone that is very talkative. Okay, so we use the adjective and we use the rest of the sentence to figure out the meaning. Nowadays, you have apps that you can just look up the definition very quickly, which I definitely do encourage you. But sometimes, like for example, if you're taking a test or maybe you're reading a book or something like that, you might not always have access to a dictionary, okay? So that's why using context clues is something that's extremely important and helpful going forward. Okay, a third strategy that you can use is to identify parts of the word. So being able to take a look at the different parts of a word is also going to help you with reading quicker and really more importantly, improving your vocabulary. So take a look at this example that we have right here. The girl talked about feelings ambiguously. The word ambiguously can be divided into several parts. So first of all, we have the prefix, and prefix means the beginning of the word. So the pre part actually means beginning or first, okay? So taking a look at this example, ambo means two, okay? I don't expect you to know that. I didn't know that before, that's okay. But ambo means two. Now, generally, the ending OUS means that it is an adverb. Okay. However, in this case, the word ends in ly, which makes it an adverb. I'm sorry, I'm gonna mute. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so just a polite reminder, if everyone could mute themselves, please.
I request the participants to mute their mic, please.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Okay, so again, going back to our example, ly is a very common adverb ending, and an adverb is something that describes the verb. Okay, so ultimately, when we put these two things together, we have ambiguously, so we have to, we have the description, and then we're talking about the verb. So ambiguously means in two different ways. The girl talked about her feelings ambiguously. This means that she was talking about it in more than one way. Okay, another common strategy that I recommend is to do things like, for example, if you're reading a book and you're able to make certain marks on it, I would recommend underlining, highlighting, or literally just making marks in the book. This tells you that this specific word, phrase, or section is extremely important. Okay, so writing down those important pieces of information in the book or wherever you have it is going to be extremely important. Okay. If you don't have access to a book, maybe it's an e-reader or something like that where you can't actually make notes right there on there. I would strongly recommend having a notebook and then just taking notes in the notebook that you can refer to as you're reading. Okay. Next, as I just mentioned, take notes, right? So being able to take notes on what you read is an extremely important skill. The more practice you have, the easier it will get for you. I'll get into writing skills in just a few minutes, but for right now, it's extremely important for you to take notes as you read, just so you don't forget something. I know, and trust me, this happens to me all the time. I'll be talking to someone or I'll be reading and I'll think, oh, that's a really good idea. I should write that down. If I don't do it right away, I will forget. And so one thing I actually do is I use my phone a lot. And so I'll take a note in my phone, and that's totally fine. Taking notes doesn't have to be super formal. Whatever is easiest for you, whatever you're able to do that you will remember and refer back to, continue doing that. You're all adults, you have your own strategies, continue doing what works. That's definitely something I would encourage you to do. I mentioned this before, use a dictionary. It's very practical, it's very helpful. So say, for example, that you're doing a reading, whatever it is, it could be for a class, it could just be the news, whatever, and you see a word multiple times, you don't understand the meaning, or you're confused, you can't really continue reading unless you know what that word is. Use a dictionary. Just go in, find a word, find what the definition is, and that should help you figure out the rest of the sentence. One of my strong recommendations is dictionary.com. I don't know if you have used it before. It's very easy to remember. It's literally just dictionary.com. But there is also an app that you can use for dictionary.com. I highly recommend it. It gives not only the definition, but it gives you the part of speech, and it gives you an example, and it says the word out loud for you. Okay, so if you're reading something, you might say, okay, yeah, I understand what that word means, but I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. Okay, you can use Google Translate, which is getting better over time, but I still definitely encourage you to use dictionary.com. It's very clear pronunciation. I'll get into speaking a little bit more during the webinar, but again, dictionary.com. Right now, maybe, I don't know, you have it on your phone, go ahead, pull it up, take a look at some words, and I do encourage you to use that going forward. I also encourage you, if you do have an English-only dictionary, this really is the best way for you to improve your reading skills and vocabulary. I know it's a little bit more formal. I know it might take a little bit more time, but it is an excellent resource for you to take a look at the word and read the definition in English. And you're really forcing yourself to, to think really hard about this and to try to figure it out on your own. So it might take a little bit more time than just looking up the translation. But if you do have time, I think it's a really good skill for you. And finally, our last strategy, read. Okay, in case this wasn't obvious till now, the more reading that you do, the easier it will be for you. So like I mentioned, even if you don't fully understand something right away, that's okay. The more that you see these words written down, plus what you're reading is correct grammar, right? So you're improving your vocabulary, you're improving your spelling, you're improving your grammar, you're going to be reading faster the more that you do it. And so all of those things are going to help you to improve not only your reading skills, but your overall English skills as well. So most of you, again, said that you read about 2 hours every single day in English. Please keep doing that. If you can do more, of course, that's excellent. But I think 2 hours is definitely a reasonable amount. And you'll see your English reading skills, your proficiency level, you'll see that increase very quickly the more that you do that. One final thing I'll say before moving on, if you don't have an opportunity to read for hours every single day in English, and I understand, some of you might be parents, some of you might have, a couple jobs and you're very busy. I completely understand that. I just do encourage you, read as often as you can. If it's only, 30 minutes once a week, it's not a lot, but it's better than nothing. So really, I just do encourage you to read as much as you can, and that will certainly increase your reading abilities. Okay, so let's take a look at a reading sample together. I'm going to give you just a couple minutes to read this. I'm not going to be talking. Personally, I find it annoying when people are talking while I'm trying to read something. So I'm gonna let you read this in silence for a minute. Okay, so what you can get from sort of this reading sample, what the main idea is reasons for learning English. Okay, and how you can tell that is because we take a look at the introduction of the reading. Okay, generally the introduction introduces the main idea. It depends if you're reading just one paragraph, if you're reading a whole article or a whole chapter. It varies a little bit where that main idea is going to be. But because we're taking a look at just one paragraph, you can see that the main idea is right there in the introduction. Okay, the first thing I mentioned to you, the preview, that first strategy, this is what you can do. You can just take a look at it very quickly, read the first sentence, and that is your sort of your pathway forward. That's your guide to what the rest of the reading is going to be about. Okay, so again, many reasons for learning English. It's becoming more important in our world, which is why you are all here today. Then we have what we call the body of the paragraph. So the body is the information, essentially. It's all the details that you're going to be reading about. It gives you all that, we sort of use the phrase meat and potatoes. That just means that's the really important stuff that's within the paragraph itself. So here you see that we have several examples. We talk about worldwide travel. We talk about education. We talk about becoming a professional. We also talk about how it's important for the world language of business. Okay, so again, we have our introduction, we have the body, and then finally, we have our conclusion. So in summary, there are various reasons why people learn English. The reasons continue to grow in importance. And so you see that this conclusion, it's very similar to the introduction, and that's because it is summarizing the main idea from the first sentence. Okay, again, we'll get into writing skills in a little bit, but I just wanted to point out that maybe you're reading very quickly, maybe you don't have a lot of time to read. This is generally how readings are going to be organized. So I do encourage you, again, to kind of keep this in mind. Introduction, you have the body, and then you have the conclusion. One other thing I want to point out here is the use of the words similarly. So that's sort of over here, kind of towards the end. Similarly and in summary. Now, similarly, again, this is most likely a word that you've heard before, maybe you use it often. Similarly means something that is almost the same or close to, okay? And so what we do is we take a look here at the sentence before. Some others learn English for educational purposes, such as going to college or becoming a professional. Okay, so this word similarly, it's what we call a transition word. And so transition meaning going from one idea to the next. In this case, because I said similar means like same or close to, we are connecting two ideas. If you wanted to talk about two different ideas, you could say oppositely, or you could say in contrast, and that shows that you're talking about something very different, okay? So here we're talking about becoming a professional. And then similarly, English is often learned because it is required or important for their jobs, okay? So again, you're connecting those two ideas by using an example of a transition word. Likewise, we have in summary. Again, this is maybe something you use, maybe you're looking for some help in, okay, well, I'm not sure exactly how do I start the conclusion. In summary is a perfect example of doing that, because what you're saying is I'm done giving details and now I'm going to talk about pretty much what I mentioned before, just as a conclusion. So I'm going to put it all together. I'm going to summarize it into something short. So as I mentioned, those are examples of what we call transition words. I am going to put my information here. I have certainly you can visit my website, and you can always email me as well. If you are interested, I do have a whole list of transition words. I'm more than happy to share that with you. It's something I talk about every time I talk about writing with my students. I pull up the transition word list, and I tell students that their assignment and their tasks are to use those transition words in their writing because it's that important, okay? As you use it in your writing, you see here how we're taking a look at the reading sample. That's what's going to help you. It's going to reinforce that. So as you start reading, notice these transition words. If you don't know them, look them up. If you see them multiple times, that means that they're very important. Okay, so I definitely encourage you to take a look at those and start doing some practice with your writing so that you can feel comfortable using those. Okay, now I know not all of you are attending the School of Social Work. I know most of you are. Obviously, this is who's presenting it. And so I did just want to point out some information as in relation to sort of the more formal side of reading, okay? In particular, I'm talking about business documents and forms, or what we call technical English. Another word for this is jargon. I don't know if anyone has used that word before, but essentially what that means is just those very formal words. Oftentimes, I always think of if you're reading a manual, like maybe you buy a piece of technology or something like that, and you're looking through the instructions, and sometimes there's a lot of words that you think, I don't really know what this means. A lot of that is very technical English, okay? Now, when we're talking about business documents, these can be very challenging, even for native speakers. I'll be completely honest, especially when it comes to, like I said, jargon or sometimes legal forms. You know, a lot of times businesses send out emails and they say, this is, you know, please review our terms. Just take a look at that next time you get an email like that. Some of it can be very, very difficult. Again, even for a native speaker, it's because we don't use those words very often, okay? What this means is that you're gonna have to take some time. It might mean slowing down a little bit as you read these documents or forms, and using a dictionary to help you figure it out, okay? I've said dictionary about 20 times already, and that's because that's how important it is, especially if you're doing this for work, okay? A lot of you are going to become social workers, which is amazing, by the way, and I think that's an extremely important profession, and I give you a lot of credit for doing that. That's extremely important. But you are going to have to fill out paperwork, okay? Maybe you're going to be doing it in English. And so that's why it's very important to understand it's okay to take your time. The other thing you can do is if it's a long form or if there's many different sections, break the reading into different sections one at a time. Don't feel like you need to read the entire thing in 10 minutes, right? Depending on what it is, if you need to kind of slow down, just do one section at a time, maybe one paragraph. And that's going to be very important because oftentimes you need to understand the first paragraph before you move on to the second one. So again, in regards to business documents, technical English, it is okay to slow down. The other thing is it's okay to ask for help. Please do not feel shy about asking for help from someone else. Many times, especially if it comes to technical English, just ask someone, just say, hey, have you worked with this before? For example, here, one of your instructors, they are your instructors for a reason, because they have experience. So if you try reading a form and you say, I'm having a lot of difficulty, ask your instructor. Maybe you have a friend or a coworker or a classmate, and you're just really struggling, just ask them, have you done this before? Can you help me out with that? It's better to ask for help than to make a mistake, okay? So don't worry about that. This is also true for writing. Writing professional documents and forms sometimes is harder than reading them because you think this is very academic, this is very professional. It can be challenging in many ways. So really what you need to do is understand what you need to write first and then work on that writing. And again, same thing. If you have to fill out a form, ask someone, excuse me, who has experience, just say, can you look at this? And can you tell me if I'm doing this correctly? Okay, so let's go back to you. What do you enjoy reading? And so what do you like to read? You know, it could be magazines, it could be, you know, news articles. So in the chat, if you can just put down some answers of things that you enjoy reading. Okay, novels, comics, poems. Ooh, poems can be very difficult. So I appreciate that one. Okay, short stories, memoirs, drama. Okay, lots of novels. Okay, so religious text as well. Autobiographies. Okay, essays. Certainly instructors always enjoy reading those essays. Okay, excellent. A lot of novels that I'm seeing, and a lot of stories and news information as well. Thank you, thank you all for sharing. As was mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, obviously there's a lot going on in our world right now. I'm not sure if sort of what your news sources are. If you do read them in English, maybe you read them in your first language. Again, you know, reading in whatever language is extremely helpful. If you do read in English, continue doing that. There's a lot of very good vocabulary that you'll learn in reading news articles. If you're kind of a little bit hesitant about reading in English, that's okay. I would encourage you to just, you know, maybe pull up a news site or something like that, and just see how well you're able to understand the reading. But if not, I do encourage you to read things that you do enjoy, okay? That's something very important. If you just read something that's academic and super professional all day long, sometimes that can get a little monotonous, and you think, I want to read something else. I want to read something. Okay. So again, I definitely encourage you to read things that you enjoy, because you will increase your fluency. You'll be able to read faster because it is something you enjoy. Nothing against academic text, of course. I went to college for many years. I do enjoy reading that, but I also understand that can be very difficult. It can be tiring if you're just reading a lot of readings for homework or for work. It can be tiring. So don't forget to enjoy yourself. Find things that you enjoy reading. Comics, several of you said comics. Excellent, that's great. Comics are great, okay? So continue doing what you enjoy. I mentioned it before, keep a dictionary of your own. Look up words you don't know and keep a list of them to refer to. So this is gonna help you with, like I mentioned, vocabulary comprehension. It's gonna help you with spelling. It's gonna help you with grammar. And so what you see here, this is what I call, I put a tool together. It's very simple. I call it a personal dictionary. And so as you see here, you have three things. You have the word itself. Well, four things actually. You have the word itself. You have the part of speech, which in this case is the adjective. You have the definition or synonym. So definition, the meaning of the word, and then synonym means a word that is similar. And then you have your example sentence. So let's take a look at this example that we have right here. So the word is plausible. Plausible. Maybe you've heard this word before, maybe you haven't. If you haven't, then this is a perfect example for you. So what plausible means is possible or able to happen. So as an example, you can say, it's plausible that we will be able to travel around the world by the end of the year. Okay, so we're using that example. It's possible. It is. It might happen. It is able to happen potentially. And I really hope so. I really hope. I miss traveling. Okay, so one other thing that you can do as you keep your personal dictionary, and like I said, feel free to send me an email. I can send you this tool so that you can have it in Word form, and then you can start to fill that out. One final thing that you can add to this is, depending on your level of comfort of the word in English, you can also put the translation in your first language. Okay, so I would recommend sort of maybe adding a column next to the word itself, maybe a translation column. And so that way you're able to see it in your first language as well. And so that's something else, another tip that I would recommend for you. Okay. Now, a lot of what I talked about so far was kind of the general reading tips for improving your fluency in reading, okay? Also, I do recommend that there's a few different things that you can do in addition to that, okay? And so, as you see here, the best way to learn vocabulary, listen to the word, and I'm just imagine one word, okay? Let's say the word plausible, okay? So you hear the word being spoken, which again, you can use that for dictionary.com. Say the word out loud. plausible, plausible. Say it at the same time as the recording. And so that way you improve your pronunciation as well. Read the word. I think that one's kind of obvious. We're talking about reading right now. But read the word over and over and over again. If nothing else, it helps with spelling. And then write the word. Write it down. Use practice. Write some sample sentences. Practice using that word over and over again. Okay? So again, we have listen to the word, speak the word, read it, and write it. Now, once you've done that, you're going to repeat. You're going to do the same thing. Listen to the word, speak the word, read it, and write it. Okay? Repetition, and I'm sure any professor will tell you this, any instructor will tell you this, repetition is super, super, super important. Okay? To the point that I'm going to be repeating myself several times throughout this webinar, because that is that important for you to understand these things. Okay? Why is it so important to do all these things? Because if you think about it, you're intaking the word, you're interacting with that word 4 times. So instead of just reading it, reading of course is very good, right? Of course that's a very good skill, but that's one thing. If you listen and speak and read and write, that's 4 times that your brain is interacting with that word, which really means that you're 4 times as likely to remember that word for the future. Okay, so with all of my students, I strongly encourage them to do that. Do all 4 of these things and then do them again. And I guarantee you, your vocabulary will increase. Okay, so in summary, there's that word again, that transition word I mentioned. In summary, use context clues to determine the meaning. Take notes, underline, highlight important sections. Use the dictionary, study and practice that new vocabulary. Read, 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 right? Like I mentioned before. And then again, don't forget to read for enjoyment. That's something that's extremely important. Okay, now, as I mentioned before, if you have questions, please wait until the very end, okay? Because we will have time for Q&A. This is actually a good practice for you. If you think of a question, write it down, and then you're practicing your English skills. Okay, so next, let's talk a little bit about writing. But let me hear from you first. How many hours do you spend writing in English each day on average? And that can include anything, whether it's texting, whether it's actually writing, whether it's on the computer. Just on average, how many hours do you spend writing? Okay, so I'm seeing a pretty big range. Looks like for some classes, a few hours every day. Okay, so 20 minutes, whatever you type on your phone, okay? That counts, like I said. Okay, so it looks like on average, more or less, probably about the same as before, about 2 hours. It looks like a few of you are saying that you don't have, either you don't have time or you're not really engaging in practicing your English writing. Okay. So thank you for telling me your for putting your answers in the chat. For those of you who don't practice English writing for various reasons, I think you know what I'm going to say next. Try to practice as much as you can, okay? It can be a scary thing, especially if you're not used to it. If you say, well, I can read pretty well, and I understand English pretty well, but when it comes to writing, I get a little bit nervous, or I just don't really like doing it. That's okay. If you just ask people, if you took a poll or a survey of native English speakers, and you say, how many of you like to write every day? It's probably going to be super low, right? So I completely understand that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some tips for how you can improve your English writing. where you can improve your English writing, and sort of how to feel more comfortable doing that. Okay, so the reason I have this, texting is not academic writing. As I just mentioned, texting is a form of writing, okay? And if you do only, whoever it was that said that, whatever I do texting, that's totally fine. That is absolutely fine. That's all practice, and that's a good thing. What I want to point out here is the word academic, okay? That texting is generally not academic writing. And why is that? Because who do you normally text? You normally text your friends, right? Or your family, or someone that you know socially on a sort of a friendly level. Maybe you text your professors or coworkers, but usually that's a little bit more formal, okay? So the reason I say this too is because many of you might text in English to each other. You might have friends that you text to in English in different countries. Generally, that kind of texting is not always correct grammar and definitely not always correct spelling, okay? And the reason that I'm telling you this is because sometimes you can, and not you specifically, but sometimes people can get into poor writing habits when they're using the words incorrectly when they're texting. So for example, like the word please. Please is spelled P-L-E-A-S-E. Sometimes when people text, they say P-L-Z. We know what that means. We know that that means please, but if you do that over and over and over again, that might actually hurt your spelling, and it might hurt your vocabulary overall, okay? So it's totally fine to text in English. I do encourage it, but just be careful with the words that you're using. And same thing, especially if you have maybe native English speakers who are friends. And this is something I talk to my students about all the time. We are not perfect, and when we text, our sort of level of English, of professional English goes down a little bit. Okay, so it's probably something that you're aware of, but again, I do just want you to be mindful of that even native English speakers, we spell words wrong sometimes, we intentionally shorten them, so just be careful when it comes to texting. Now, what my purpose today is for this webinar is not to talk about texting, but really to talk about more formal and sort of higher level academic and professional English, okay? Now, the first thing I want you to think about when it comes to writing, answer these 4 questions. I think if you can answer these 4 questions well before you start writing, this is going to help you a ton because these questions are so important. So, question number 1, what is the purpose of what you are writing? Essentially, why are you writing? Is it for a class? Is it for work? Is it for a friend or a family member? Are you writing an email to your parents? Are you writing a text to somebody? Okay, all of these things, what is it that you're writing for? Question number 2, what are the goals you hope to achieve? So it's kind of similar to question 1, except that for question 2, for what are your goals? How do you know that you're achieving your goals? What is it that you have to do in order to say, yeah, I feel good about that. That was a good piece of writing. Is it for a class? That's usually a little bit easier because instructors, professors, they're going to give you criteria that what you need to write, usually pretty specifically. If you're writing an email to someone, that's a little more difficult. If you're writing an email to a coworker, for example, or a classmate, those goals, you do need to think about a little bit more. Number 3, who is your audience? This is super, super important and goes back to my example about texting. If you're texting your friend, you don't really need to think about this a whole lot. I know my friend, they're my best friend. We text every single day. Okay, that's easy. If you're writing an email, maybe you're working with a client at your job and you need to write a formal email in English to them, that's a very, very different audience, and you need to approach it. You need to have your plan that's different than how you just text your regular friend, okay? And sometimes that means taking time and just stopping and thinking about it. One thing that I can tell you that I've learned, and this is from years of teaching, is that a lot of times students, they're excited to get started. It doesn't mean that they want to, but they just want to get started. Here's your assignment. Okay, these are the directions. Let me just get started. But it's so important that you stop and think about what your goals are first. What I've seen happen too many times is that students will start writing and they're halfway through or they've finished and they hand it to me and I say, this isn't what I asked for. This doesn't follow the directions. This doesn't follow what the purpose or the goals are of the writing, okay? And so I always tell them, please take your time, write down those objectives before you start writing, okay? Number 4, how much time do you have? This is super important as well. Do you have 20 minutes? Do you have 2 weeks? That's also gonna be critical in figuring out what your plan is, sort of your plan of attack for writing whatever it is that you are going to be writing. Okay, so again, what is the purpose? What are your goals? Who's your audience? How much time do you have to write? So let's take a look at an outline. So I mentioned before that this kind of goes into your whole goals. What are my goals and what is the purpose of what I'm writing? We took a look before at that reading sample and we had our introduction, we had our body, and we had our conclusion. And so now you see here that we have that same thing, except now we're gonna be writing instead of reading. So taking a look at this outline, you see that we have, and again, this is not your actual, I call it an essay outline. You can modify this to whatever it is that you're writing. But we have our, let's just say for the sake of this, that we're talking about an essay, okay? It's the School of Social Work. You've been given a task to write an essay. What is your title? It's not something you need to figure out immediately, but it's important to think about. Then you have your introduction. Now, a thesis statement, and you might call it something else. I know there's people from many different countries here on this webinar right now. Sometimes people use different words for it, but what we call a thesis statement is the main idea of your writing. And that's often in the introduction. And what it does, it tells the reader what you're going to be talking about in the rest of the essay, okay? So a thesis statement is extremely important, and it's something you need to take time when you think about what you're going to be writing about. Next, as I mentioned before, we have the body of the essay. So these are the paragraph details. It's what you plan to write about in each paragraph. Because this is just an outline, you don't need to do a lot of writing. This is really more of just creating those ideas. And it helps with organization. You can write notes if you're going to be using quotations or statistics, numbers, things like that. You can put all that information in these paragraph details, and this helps you to organize your thoughts, your ideas, like I mentioned, so that you don't find yourself, I finished my essay, and then you realize, oh, you know what, I completely did this out of order, or this isn't organized. So definitely organize first, and then start to put your information here on the outline, and then that's when you finally go in and begin doing actual writing. Okay, so we have the introduction, we have the body, and then at the end, we have our conclusion. Okay, so the conclusion is your summary of what you wrote about in your main writing piece. So just like we saw in the reading example, the conclusion usually summarizes what you talked about. Depending on the length of your essay, a conclusion might be 1 paragraph, it might be 2, it might be an entire page. For my master's thesis, I had to write, it was practically a small book. I think it was about 85 or 90 pages. And my conclusion was it was several pages long because the rest of the essay was, or the rest of the thesis was so long, okay? If you're writing a 1-page essay, then you might just need 1 kind of short paragraph at the end, okay? I would encourage you though, and again, I'm talking specifically to college students, if you have an activity that your instructor assigns to you, they'll probably tell you what the length is. They might give you a range, 1 or 2 pages, 3 to 4 pages. But I would encourage you to talk with them as you figure out your outline. And so that way you have a good idea of what the length is specifically with how much time you have, again, and so that you're organizing your ideas correctly. Next, proofread and edit. This is also something that I strongly encourage everybody to do with their writing. Proofread just means to, so proof means validate, or it means making sure that things are correct. Okay, so proofread means to reread what you wrote and make sure that there's not any mistakes. We're all human beings, we sometimes make mistakes. What this helps for proofreading and editing, it allows you to look for errors in things like grammar, vocabulary, spelling, and organization. All of these things you're able to do by rereading what you wrote and by editing and by taking your time doing it, okay? Proofreading, it does not mean just reading it one time very quickly. It means taking your time, reading every single sentence, reading every word, and looking for these things. I have students right now that I help them. Well, I have one student in particular who I'm helping with his formal English for work. And one thing that we've been working on very, very strongly is his ability to edit and proofread. He really likes to write quickly and then send the email out. And we've noticed that he makes certain mistakes. And so I said, you need to slow down and you need to read 2, sometimes 3 times to catch your mistakes. And when we go through the email, he tells me, he said, oh yeah, I wrote that wrong. I spelled that wrong, the grammar's wrong. And so I just said, it's a very simple solution. Just reread it several times, okay? So I think that's something that's gonna be extremely important. Next, as I mentioned, spelling is very important for proofreading. And here's an example why. Desert and dessert are 2 very different words. They look almost identical, but they have very, very different meanings. And so whether, you know, if you're talking about going to the desert, I don't know, maybe you went on a trip or something, or you were driving through the desert, that's very different than taking a trip to the dessert or driving through the desert, because that does not make any sense. Okay, so it's just one example of how proofreading and double checking your spelling is extremely important. And I'll admit, I mean, certainly I make mistakes, but what I do for work specifically, every single email that I send out, even if it's just 4 sentences, I always proofread it just to make sure. That's how specific you need to be sometimes, especially when it's for work, especially for those formal documents like I mentioned earlier. Okay, I think this is, you know, by now my theme is practice and repetition, okay? Now, those of you especially who said, I don't have a lot of time to write, or I just don't do it very often, this is a very practical thing that you can do. This is what I do mention to, I advise all of my students to do. Those of you who write 2-3 hours a day, you do this anyway, so, you know, keep that up, that's great. But what I recommend for everyone else, write 1 paragraph each day. Within that paragraph, write what you did that day. And so you're working on your past tense. Write what you are doing, present tense, and then write what you will do the next day, future tense. So right away in 1 paragraph, you've already covered 3 different tenses in English: past, present, and future. I also recommend you to use new vocabulary words in your writing each day. So as you see, now that I'm kind of building on one thing after the next, I mentioned about the having your own personal dictionary, okay? So step 1, you're reading something. Step 2, you write that new word in your dictionary. Step 3, you use that word in your writing, and then you're practicing it. And then you can say it out loud, you can listen to yourself saying it, you read it, and you're writing it. So again, you're practicing all 4 of those things. If you do this every single day, again, think of the math, right? 1 paragraph minimum every single day. I mean, that, you know, that's 52 paragraphs in a year. That's practically a small book. And so you can publish your book and make some money. Okay, even though we're talking about writing, reading is extremely important as well. Reading greatly helps improve your writing skills. It helps with vocabulary comprehension, it helps with spelling, with grammar. It especially helps with idea generation. And so to go back to the outline, okay, let me just go back to this. As you're thinking about what am I going to be writing about? How am I going to organize my ideas? It's not easy. I'm not saying that this is an easy thing to do, and that's why I encourage you to take some time and think about it first. But as you are reading, you start to see how things are organized, okay? And so that helps you to kind of model that with your own writing. And so you see how things are introduced, what the main body or paragraph details are, and then you see how other people write their conclusions. And so you're able to do that as well with your own writing. And finally, organization. Like I mentioned, it helps you organize your ideas. It helps you put them in the correct order. The other nice thing about the outline, as you're writing your outline information out, it's not set in stone, as we say. It means that you can change it. If you put it in paragraph 3 and you decide, you know what, that should go in paragraph 1, great. You've made that decision before you have written those paragraphs. And so now you don't have to go back and try to repeat that. You can just do it correct in that correct order. So in summary for writing, determine your goals, your objectives and purpose, as well as your audience. Proofread, make sure that you go in and edit your work. Practice every day, practice as often as you can, again, and read as often as you can. Okay, so there's 2 final points that I want to be talking about. The first is conversational English, and then I'm going to talk to you about some references I recommend for you. So this is actually, this is me with one of my students. And I was actually teaching her Spanish. She wanted to improve her Spanish skills. And so we would meet once a week and we would just talk about our day, okay? And so that's kind of a good example of how something very easy that you can do to practice your conversational English and your fluency. Okay, so you might have guessed what's coming next. How many hours do you spend speaking in English each day on average? So if you can put your comments in the chat. Okay, so I'm seeing some ranges. So 20 to 30 minutes, 2 hours, 6 hours. Okay, so some people, they don't necessarily have opportunities to speak English with others. Okay, depending on your mood. That's actually a very good point. If you don't feel like talking or in English, that might decrease how many hours you're going to. If you're feeling really excited about it, that might increase your hours. Okay, you talk with your daughter, excellent. Okay, and then also during work time. So that's another good point as well. If you're able to practice your English at work, that's excellent, because not only are you given the opportunity to speak at work and just naturally improve your English speaking abilities, you're also getting paid for it. And so that's kind of a nice thing too. If you are able to do that at work, I definitely encourage you, especially if it can be sometimes difficult, or if you find it a little bit nervous, that you find yourself a little bit nervous speaking, that's totally fine. I can tell you from experience, again, I told you I speak Spanish, that's my second language, I had to learn it. It can be scary to have to speak a second language to others, especially if they're speaking very quickly and you think, oh no, I don't know everything that they're saying. or I'm a little bit nervous just because what if I start speaking and I say something wrong, or what if I forget a word? I've been there before. I've worked with many students who have been there before, and that's totally fine. You have to kind of put yourself out there. You have to practice as much as you can. I'm going to give you some tips for practicing, but excuse me, specifically, especially for those people who I'm sorry about that. Especially for those who don't have opportunities to practice, I will give you some suggestions sort of at the end of this presentation on what you can do to practice your English. There's several different options that you do have because that is something that is so important. And I do want to make sure that I give you some tools and resources for that. Okay, so some ways of increasing your fluency. Now, fluency often means your speaking ability, okay? But when I use the word fluency, I also incorporate listening ability, listening comprehension, okay? Now, everyone has a different level of English fluency. Some of you, especially those of you who speak every day at work, it probably comes more natural because you're able to do it every single day. Those of you who don't have opportunities to practice, it's going to be a little bit slower because maybe you don't have people to talk to, or you can't do it very often. And that's okay, because what you can do is you can at least increase your listening comprehension, which actually in turn does increase your own fluency as well. Here are some ideas of things you can do. Watch TV, okay? Many of you probably do anyway. I'm sure that varies how much time you spend watching TV, but I do encourage you to use subtitles. Maybe you do this already. If you do, excellent, keep doing that. If you don't use subtitles, if you think, well, yeah, I understand everything, I still encourage you to use subtitles. Why? One, it's going to improve your spelling. Spelling is extremely important. I know that spelling in English is not always easy. Many times it's difficult. And if you see the words that you hear, you're going to increase your spelling. Number two, you're going to increase just your general vocabulary. Number three, your grammar. So maybe even though you understand what they're saying, you might not know exactly the order of the words, or you might not understand sort of, okay, well, why did they use that word here and why didn't they put it at the other, at the end of the sentence? You read those subtitles, and that helps you to improve your grammar as well. Okay, so again, spelling, vocabulary, and grammar, three things can be increased just by using those subtitles. How else does this help? Pronunciation. That's a huge thing. Okay, so just like I mentioned, if you want to practice your writing, read more. If you want to practice your reading, write more. Same thing with speaking and listening. They're interchangeable. The more that you do of one, the better that you will be with the other. Okay, so things you can watch, TV shows. People like watching TV shows. You all have your favorites. Netflix, super common, really good subtitles that you can use there. Which, by the way, excuse me, YouTube does have subtitles, of course. Those aren't always 100% accurate. And again, I can tell you from experience, having uploaded things on YouTube, don't expect that those are 100% grammatically or spelled correctly. So just kind of as a warning to you, okay? I don't want you to develop poor habits or bad spelling habits. So just keep that in mind. You can watch the news. If you have the option of putting it with subtitles, that's excellent. If you don't, and not everyone does, that's fine. I know for, again, we have a lot of different countries that are represented here today. If you do have an English-speaking station that you're able to get, I do encourage that. You can also find it online as well. Listen to the radio. Music. Music is a great way of learning new vocabulary and helping your pronunciation. When I was learning Spanish, I listened to songs in Spanish all the time. I also love music, so it was a win-win for me. But I still do. I still listen to music in Spanish all the time. That helps me with vocabulary. That helps me with pronunciation. It helps even with me speaking. because if I'm singing the words or speaking the words, you're repeating it. And so you're improving your own pronunciation as well. Same thing with the news. You can listen to the news online or on the radio, even on YouTube. Okay, I also have play video games. And so you're probably wondering, why would playing video games help me with my English? So any of you who do play video games, if you do play with other English speakers, that, believe it or not, is an excellent way of improving your English. Now, it's not at all formal. In fact, many times it's the opposite of formal, but it does help with fluency and vocabulary and pronunciation. So let me give you an example. I had a student several years ago, and his English was incredible. I was teaching at an English school, and his overall English was excellent. His speaking ability, his pronunciation, his slang vocabulary was unbelievable. And so I just asked him, I just said, kind of almost like, why are you here? Like, your English is so good. How did you get such a good accent and vocabulary and everything? And he smiled and he said, I play a lot of video games. And he was serious. He played a lot of video games, and he said, I learned a lot. And I was very scared at first because I didn't understand everything. And he said, I just kept doing it. And so that's a perfect example of how, not just with video games, but just in general, if you speak, if you practice over and over and over again, you are going to improve. Okay. You can talk to yourself. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I do it all the time. If I want to practice Spanish, for example, if I don't have anyone to speak with, I'm just going to talk to myself, whether in my mind or out loud sometimes. If that's the only opportunity for you to speak English, then take it. It's better for you to practice with yourself, with just one person, than with nobody. Okay. Don't be nervous about it. Don't be afraid. The more you practice, the easier it will be for you, and you'll see your progress immediately start to improve. Okay, as I mentioned, practice with others if you can, even 20 to 30 minutes every day, including yourself. Maybe you just want to practice with yourself 20 to 30 minutes every day, and that's totally fine. One other recommendation I have is record yourself as you're speaking. Listen to yourself talking. If you're anything like me, if you've ever done that before, I think I sound weird when I hear myself talking. And it's just because, it's a different angle that you're hearing it. But it's really amazing when you hear yourself speaking in another language, because you say, wow, I really sound like that, or even in your first language. But the more that you do this, it's going to help you understand where your limitations are and where you need to improve your own pronunciation and fluency. Okay, so I certainly do encourage you to do that as well. Next, career opportunities. Many of you are on this webinar today, not just because you want to improve your English, but also because you're thinking about education or you're thinking about career. I strongly encourage you to include your English abilities in your resume or your CV, or both if you have both. Employers are looking, especially nowadays, they're looking for people who can speak, read, and write in English. Okay? Depending on your country, depending on the kind of job that you want, English may even be required. So that's going to be something extremely important that you want to put on your resume. Bilingual. Bilingual is huge. I don't know if any of you are thinking about maybe getting a job in, I don't know, like Britain or Australia or even the United States. 99% of jobs just expect that you are going to be able to speak English. If you do plan to maybe go to an English speaking, Britain or the US or a country like that, the fact that you're bilingual is extremely important, because a lot of Americans, rather unfortunately, really only speak one language. And I say unfortunately just because I think languages are beautiful. I think that there's so much that you can learn from learning another language. but a lot of people here only speak English, okay? So if you are able to show that you speak another language, that is extremely important. In your countries, same thing, being bilingual, the fact that you can say, hey, you know, I'm bilingual in English, or maybe you've gone to an English academy, or maybe you took the TOEFL or the IELTS exam and you want to showcase what your score was, definitely put that on your CV and your resume, because that is going to be extremely important. Also, I do recommend using LinkedIn. Maybe you already have a LinkedIn account, maybe you don't. Depending on how often LinkedIn is used in your country, this may or may not be something that you want to do right away. For many countries around the world, LinkedIn is becoming a lot more useful and a lot more common. And if you don't know what LinkedIn is, what it's used for is primarily for job searching, for networking, and then for showcasing your education skills and interests. So again, perfect example. You can say, I'm bilingual in English. I took the exam and this is the score I got. LinkedIn is excellent. I highly recommend it for all of my students that I work with. In fact, some students, I've helped them to create their own LinkedIn account and help them start to network with other people. Again, if this is something that you're interested in, let me know. I can help you build a LinkedIn account, but just check it out. You know, you can just go to linkedin.com and it's free to use. And I do recommend starting to create an account there. Next, I did want to mention briefly and talk a little bit about disabilities and learning English. So there might be some participants on this call today, on this webinar, or maybe you know someone who has some form of disability and they also want to learn English. And so here's some advice for you with regards to disabilities. First of all, there are a variety of ways to learn English, okay? Maybe someone has difficulty with reading or writing. Well, there's always speaking and listening, okay? So there's multiple ways of learning English. What that means is those areas that you might need extra help in, or that person might need extra support, that's where practice is extremely important. Practice is important for everybody, right? Those who have disabilities, definitely encourage them to practice those areas that they're weaker in, that they need extra support, and they will start to increase their skills in that area. What that might also mean is individual tutoring and additional English classes for anyone who does have a certain disability and they do need extra help. Okay, so that is something I would definitely encourage to look into a little bit more. And then finally, using technology. I mentioned before, watching TV, Netflix, YouTube. Technology is extremely helpful, especially for people who, again, maybe they have difficulty with, listening comprehension. That's where you can use subtitles. That's a very simple example of how you can use whatever you have available to you in order to help increase your fluency with your speaking, listening, reading, and writing skills. Okay, so I do want to kind of leave you before we get to Q&A with several references that I think will be very, very helpful for you. Okay, on the left-hand side, this is actually something from my business, from Learn Now, Learn Well. I call it Phrases of the Week. And so what these are is if you sign up, you get 2 free emails twice a week. It includes commonly used vocabulary, phrases in English and Spanish. Maybe you want to be ambitious and learn another language and learn Spanish. So you get phrases in English and Spanish. And this is an example of a common, what we call phrasal verbs. So a phrasal verb is a phrase that we use in English all the time. There are thousands of examples, and sometimes it can be difficult for non-native speakers, okay? So here's a perfect example for you. Call off. Maybe you know this already, maybe you don't, but call off means to cancel. And so this is often used when we're talking about meetings or like sports games or planned events. And and it's something that you need to cancel. So for example, if you say, are we still meeting at 3 this afternoon? No, the meeting was called off. Oh, okay, why? We get to leave work early today. A nice surprise from our boss. Okay, so again, this is an example of using the word or the phrase call off. And so there's a lot more helpful vocabulary phrases that you can get through our phrases of the week option. And this is actually, this is something that I started because I had a lot of students who were asking me about sort of, these non-academic phrases or words that they hear all the time. And they say, I don't know what this word means. If they say, like, someone said, we're gonna try to pull it off. And say, well, what does pull it off mean? Pull it off means be successful. Okay, and so situations like that where you almost have to be told the definition in order for you to understand what it means. So anyway, if you're interested, you can go to my website, learnnowlearnwell.com, and that's where you can sign up for it. I also encourage you, again, dictionary.com. It provides definitions, examples, and pronunciation. Thesaurus.com, which is kind of an affiliate of dictionary.com. It includes synonyms, words that are similar, and antonyms, words that are opposite. And then finally, there's something called the Purdue Online Writing Lab, or the OWL for short. Purdue is a system of colleges here in the United States. And the online writing lab, it's a free resource. I highly, highly recommend it, especially if you're looking at improving your formal academic English writing skills. I believe in the outline that was sent, it does have that sort of link there, or at least the information. But if you just do a Google search for Purdue Online Writing Lab, it'll come right up, and I do highly recommend that for you. As I mentioned, we do have online courses. These are 2 examples of the courses that you can take through Learn Now, Learn Well. We have our Business English course, and so this helps with professional English. It gives examples of vocabulary and phrases, email communication, best practice, how to read and write professionally, how to solve problems at work. And this is an online and self-guided course, so you can work at your own pace. I mentioned the phrasal verb, like call off or pull it off. I do have an entire course just about phrasal verbs in English. So this does include definitions, videos, examples of how to use these phrasal verbs, and it gives you an opportunity to practice your skills as well. So all this information you can find at learnnowlearnwell.com. And finally, we're on social media. All of these social media outlets, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Pinterest, and YouTube. We actually are going to be adding a lot more videos on YouTube starting next week. So you can kind of be on the lookout for that as well. But feel free to follow us on social media. And I'm always posting new helpful vocabulary, new tips for improving your English and language skills, as well as some career coaching as well. Okay, so at this point, we are going to turn over to some questions that you all have. And so Ms. Nandita is going to, she's going to be reading the questions out loud, and then I'm going to be responding to each of those questions.
There's one question which has come from Prabhu Ram. How can we correct someone's English pronunciation? No matter how many times I tell my students the correct pronunciation of a word, they say the word with wrong pronunciation again. Is there a way to do this?
Yeah, so excellent question. I guess the first thing I would say is the question itself, sort of the wrong pronunciation. And the reason I say that is because let's take India for example. I mean, there's British English pronunciation, and there's American English pronunciation, and Australian and Irish and so on. And so sometimes it depends on where the student is learning that word, you know, which sort of country they're learning that from. And so sometimes it might actually be the correct pronunciation for a different country. However, if it's very specific that you are trying to get them to say it a certain way over and over and over again, what I strongly encourage is we call it call and response. And so maybe this is something that you do already, where you say the word and then you have the class or student repeat it after you. And then you do this over and over and over again. I would also focus specifically on the sound itself. So if it's a longer word and they're having difficulty pronounce it, break it up into sections. So for example, like the English R, sort of that soft R sound, it's very difficult for many people learning English to pronounce that. And so instead of doing the entire word, I just say, let's focus on the pronunciation of the letter R first. Make sure that you understand that first, and then we'll go into the word itself, and then break it up into sections and just do part of the word one thing at a time. So like, for example, the word like responsibility, it's a long word. So instead of saying responsibility, just say re-spon-si-bi-li-ti, like that, break it up into sections. Make sure that you have one section of the word correct, and then that's when you do the rest of the word itself. So I hope that helps.
There's another question from Sita Lakshmi. She asks, as a teacher, how to develop the communication skills of the students? What would you answer her?
Yeah, so I mean, communication, I guess I'm assuming she means specifically listening and speaking, primarily probably speaking skills, perhaps writing as well. And so like, you know, I gave some examples during the webinar today about increasing your writing skills, just practicing, doing a lot of reading. When it comes to speaking communication, I definitely encourage people, like I said, to just practice with anyone that they can. One other thing that you might want to do is create scenarios. Okay, so say for example that you're talking with your friends every day in English, which is great, but you probably kind of talk about the same things. And so what I would recommend is be a little bit creative, make it a little bit fun. So maybe say, you know, we call it role playing. So for example, whether it's you know, like an instructor and a student, or maybe you want to practice you know, going to the doctor and asking questions, or you want to practice maybe a job interview or something like that. Come up with different scenarios, use different vocabulary words, and then practice speaking them in those kind of practice situations. And so that way you're able to get a variety of words that you're using. You're able to practice your vocabulary, your pronunciation. You're able to practice your fluency overall. But I definitely recommend just using a variety of things. If you want to practice your communication skills in general, again, I do recommend things like that. And even, like I mentioned before, watching TV, you're able to see how other people communicate. You're able to see even things like intonation, which is kind of like your voice going up and down. Like, for example, if you ask a question, you know, like if I say in English, where are you from? My voice goes down at the end. Where are you from? It goes up and then down. But if I ask the question, why? My voice goes up. Okay, so little things like that, it definitely helps when you're listening to other people, and then you're informing your own self as you're practicing those skills.
Yeah, there are, I think a lot of participants are asking questions on pronunciation, how to improve pronunciations. And they are asking, do you think gestures play an important role in communication?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess to kind of answer both parts. So pronunciation, like I said, repetition is key. But you have to have the correct pronunciation that you're listening to in order for you to be correct as well. Okay. And so what I mean by that, and that's why I sort of keep emphasizing listening to, like, say, let's just say an American accent, for example, or an American pronunciation. I'm American, and so that's what I'm saying. But I would recommend maybe listening to TV shows in American TV shows, listening to the news, dictionary.com. Like I said, if you go there, even Google Translate, it says the pronunciation, and you can even change it according to accent. So I would definitely encourage you, whether it's you or your students, as you're focusing on pronunciation, hear the correct form first, and then repeat after that. Okay. What I recommend, kind of 3 steps. Number 1, listen and repeat. So just very basic. You hear them and then you repeat it. Number 2, say it with them. Say it at the same time as them. And so then you can hear in real time if you're saying the correct pronunciation, or if you still need to improve something. Number 3, I mentioned this earlier in the webinar, is record yourself. Record yourself, listen to your own pronunciation, record yourself, give it to someone else. You know, maybe you have an English instructor, or maybe you have other, maybe native English speaking friends or colleagues. Have them listen to it and then see how your pronunciation is. Okay. Repetition, like I said, over and over again, that's extremely important. And as I just mentioned before, break it up into different sections. It can be very difficult if you're trying to do long words and you kind of get frustrated because you say, I can't get this word right. That's okay. Slow down, start by breaking it up, and improve each section at a time. And that's really the only way that you're ultimately going to improve your pronunciation overall. Part 2 to that question, are gestures important? Absolutely. If you're talking on the phone, that's one of the hardest things to do because you can't see the other person. You're 100% relying on listening. If you have difficulties in understanding spoken English, that can be very difficult. So yeah, I absolutely do think using gestures is very important. I talk with my hands, and what I mean by that is I use my hands all the time when I'm speaking to emphasize. And I also do it because I've taught a lot of students in English, and I know that it helps. So for example, if I'm speaking to someone in Spanish in my second language, I can read their lips and I can also see their hand gestures, and that helps me a lot. So definitely, I do encourage you to continue using gestures because it is going to help everyone that you're speaking with.
Okay. There's another question. What is the best method to enhance English language skills? And I think in continuation, the same thing is any online course. Is there any online course to enhance our communication skills?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess for the first part, and kind of everything that I mentioned today, all of those, speaking, listening, reading, writing, when you do all of those things together, you're going to see very quickly that your English is going to improve, and you're able to see your progress. And by the way, and I'm glad that the question was asked, one very important thing is to increasing your own English skills. Sometimes what helps is taking a look at the progress that you've made, okay? And so I think by recording yourself, whether it's just speaking or even taking a video of yourself, just do that, today, do it tomorrow. Just take a video of yourself speaking in English or reading or writing, and then take a look 2 months from now, after you've done these things, after you've improved, you've worked on your writing skills and you've read more, you're practicing your speaking and listening, you're able to see your progress being made. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes we don't always see that and we don't always recognize that because we know ourselves, we hear ourselves every single day. But if you talk to someone else, they might say, wow, your English has gotten really good in the last couple months. They notice it. And so I think that's also extremely important. As far as online courses go, I mean, like I said, I do online tutoring. I'm more than happy to talk with you further. I do encourage you to send me an email if you're interested. We can talk about creating sort of an online tutoring schedule. I think as far as communication itself goes, there are some websites, if you Google, just for kind of increasing your English fluency, I know that there are a few that you do have to pay for. There are some that are free. I'm a little bit hesitant about the free ones because they're a little bit inconsistent, but if you're looking really just to increase your communication, your listening and speaking, I would recommend, again, just doing a Google search. Again, also send me an email. I do have some recommendations for you that I can email out to you some links. But like I said, really, the more that you can just practice speaking with other people, myself included, I'm more than happy to. All of those things are going to help increase your fluency.
Okay. There's this next question. Does accent determine one's fluency of language?
No, my honest opinion is no, it does not. I think if someone has a very thick accent and it's difficult for other people to understand, then I think they need to work on it. I think that's something that they will need to improve. Like I said, I sort of my area of specialty is pronunciation and accent reduction. And I'm more than happy to talk about some tips for improving that. I think it's important, like I said, to recognize that in certain countries where, like for example, in India, right, where English has a very strong influence, but it's not necessarily spoken by everybody or spoken often by everybody. You have kind of a mix of several different languages. Accent does not equal level of fluency necessarily. And so the reason I'm saying that is because, I think it's important to give yourself credit. If you speak very fluently and maybe you pronounce a few words with a thick accent or strong accent, there's nothing wrong with that. Again, like I said, the only thing is if other people start asking you to repeat yourself, if it sort of inhibits or if it makes it difficult to communicate with others, then I would suggest, yeah, then you need to work on your pronunciation a little bit. But I mean, accents, I live in Texas. Texas is a gigantic state. It's practically a country in its own. There's many different accents within this one state, as I'm sure you in your different countries can agree with, depending on your region. There's going to be different accents. So that would sort of be my advice to you, is that if it's making communication difficult, then yes, work on pronunciation. If that's just how you pronounce words, then there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. There's another question which says how to develop essay writing style.
Yeah, so essay writing style, that's a good question. I would recommend what I showed before about the writing outline. I think that's going to be extremely important because you do have to break it down into sections. Introduction, you have the body of the paragraph, the body of the essay, you have your conclusion. I would definitely also check out the Purdue Online Writing Lab, like I mentioned. That's it. Even though it's an online, website, you don't have a specific person that you can talk to. Definitely take a look at that though, because there's a lot of really good information, and they do actually kind of break it down into types. So they'll kind of ask you, like, what is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for essay? Are you looking for bibliography or references? That is a very good resource. I do think that talking to your professors is going to be extremely, extremely important. They have that job for a reason, right? They're highly qualified. They're extremely intelligent. They're the ones teaching the course. And I think that if you do talk to them specifically about that, they will be able to give you guidance. They'll be able to give you help. And the final advice that I'll give about that is read. Look at how other people are doing it. The readings that you're having for your specific courses, whether it's a textbook, even like a news article, the more that you read, like I mentioned, you're able to see how it's done by other people, how it's done successfully. And then that helps you improve your own your own writing organization, especially when it comes to essays. Reading essays can be time consuming. It can take a long time, especially to read a long essay. But I guarantee you that the more essays that you read, it will greatly help you with your own writing skills as well.
Okay. Then there's another interesting question which asks, is there any possibility to speak like a native English speaker? So,
yes. Again, it's kind of a difficult question because a native English speaker, that's kind of a very general term. I kind of gave the example of being in Texas. I live in Austin, which is a fairly decent sized city. And there's not a lot of accents. Like my accent is fairly neutral. If I drive 20 minutes out into the country, people are going to have a stronger, thicker accent. What I would encourage you to do, like I said, is practice. The more that you repeat it, you will improve your own pronunciation. For people who learn English at an earlier age, it's easier for them to pronounce things because they get exposure to it earlier. If you're an adult, let's say that you're 50 years old and you're starting to learn English, it can be difficult to sound like a native speaker, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. It just means that there needs to be some extra help and extra sort of practice put in. But the main thing I would say to you is, like I said, listen, hear how people pronounce the words, repeat those words over and over again, and kind of, maybe do some exploration into getting an accent reduction coach or someone, like I said, like I'm more than happy to meet with people, work on those specific pronunciation skills, especially for certain languages. There are common things that people have difficulty with. So like I gave the example before about the R. In many languages, that's difficult. And so what I do is I have examples where I have sentences with a lot of words that contain the letter R. And so what do? You just read those. You read them over and over and over and over again. You record yourself, and then you see the progress that you make on that pronunciation for those specific sounds.
So Joel, is there any some more time left for one more question, or should we wind up, considering you have to go back to your work?
Yeah, so it's evening for all of you, and I actually have a full day of work ahead of me. No, that's fine. We have time for one more question.
Okay. One gentleman asked that his student had asked him, why is the pronunciation of but and put different? And another question, how do I improve accent and communication skill as a lawyer? So you can take these two questions.
Good question. Sorry, what was the microphone cut out a little bit. What was the pronunciation for the first two words?
But and put. This why is the pronunciation different?
Okay. Yeah. So the short answer is within English there's a lot of range of how you pronounce certain things. An example like that, a lot of it depends on how you form the words with your lips specifically. I can definitely get into more detail. Again, if feel free to send me an email. We can talk about this more in person. But it's all about how you listen to the word and then how you form it using essentially in this case the difference between the P and the B sounds. There's a few different exercises that you can do. A very simple one, and you can actually do this right now, is if you put your hand up to your mouth and you say the word but, there's not a lot of air that comes out. So but with a B, but. And then if you say it with a P, put, you see this breath of air come out to your hand. And that's a very simple way of determining if you're using the correct pronunciation of it. And so one of them, the P sound, is what we call voiced because there's air that comes out. And then the B sound, is what we call voiceless because there's not that additional air that comes out. Okay, so that's just one example of how you can differentiate. And then the final question about being a lawyer, that's a great question. I would encourage you to take a look at my business English class because that's specifically designed for working professionals. And I do give a lot of advice about how you can improve your written skills, your reading skills, and certainly communication as well through vocabulary, through different examples that I give as far as, different vocabulary phrases and even some sayings that we have in English. So just a quick example, if you say, I dropped the ball. This is a saying that that everyone here, people use it all the time. To drop the ball means that you made a mistake or you didn't do what you were supposed to. And so something like that, that might be used at work. You say, hey, did you finish that task? You say, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball on that one. That means I did not do it. And so something like that, it's difficult to know unless you're sort of taught that, okay? So again, I would take a look at my business English course. I also definitely encourage you, same thing, read in English, as far as whether it's being a lawyer or a social worker, whatever your job is, read texts in English, because that is going to be the number one way that you can improve your vocabulary. And like I said, use those skills that I mentioned throughout my webinar. Keep a dictionary, write down the example, write down sample sentences. If you do all of those things, you will start to see your English improve very, very quickly. And I think that that's really the best way that you can do it, especially for something like law, where, again, even for a native English speaker, there's some legal terms that I don't know what they are, because I never use them because I'm not a lawyer. So being kind of immersed in that area is going to be super important, again, for whatever occupation or job that you have.
Thank you, Joel. Dear participants, due to time constraints, we cannot take up any more questions because the day has begun for Joel. He has to go back to his work. So on behalf of all the participants, I thank Joel. And now I invite Payal Chamatkar to propose a formal vote of thanks. Over to Payal.
Yeah, thank you. May I audible, ma'am?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, Payal, you are. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Wow, what an event.
Hello.
It's really great that this international webinar turned out to be very successful. I am Payal, and I am here to present a vote of thanks on the behalf of our organizing team to the people who made this event successful. I would like to take a minute and thank all of them. It's my privilege to have been asked to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. I, on behalf of Matru Seva Sangh Institute of Social Work, Nagpur, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the respectable resource person who blessed us with his presence and took out valuable time from his busy schedule. Honorable management of Matru Seva Sangh, Nagpur, respected principal, honorable professors, and my dear friends. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Joel, CEO and tutoring specialist, Learn Now Learn Well, Austin, Texas, US, who shared his precious knowledge with all of us. I must mention our deep sense of appreciation to Mr. Joel for his work. And the way he explained the topics is exemplary. I personally liked how Mr. Joel highlighted the topic, enhancing English language skills and the solution that can be implemented. Sir, you have not only spread your valuable time for us to grace this international webinar, but also have enlightened us with your commendable talk on the subject and made this webinar interesting and meaningful. Thank you once again, Mr. Joel. I would like to thank our esteemed member of Managing Committee of Matru Seva Sangh, Nagpur, for making this webinar a great success. I also wish to express my profound gratitude to our respected principal, Dr. Jyoti Niswade, for taking efforts to make this international webinar possible and providing encouragement and support. I thank all the participants from different places who have participated and made the webinar a success. I heartily congratulate Dr. Nandita Mane, convener of this international webinar, for making this webinar a great success. Once again, ma'am, congratulations. Also would like to thank Dr. Prince Kumar Agashe, Dr. Umesh Harde, Mr. Sandeep Kochar, and Mr. Gajanan Netam for their technical assistance and support, and also all the members of organizing committee for making this webinar a great success. Thank you all for making this event successful with your contribution. Thank you, one and all. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel, sir, the participants they want your email ID so that they can get in touch with you. So how do we provide them. Should we
Yep.
post it in the group?
Yeah, so let me, I can share my screen again. And I have, the information is right here. Oops. So like I said, feel free, please feel free to send me an email. info@learnnowlearnwell.com is my email. My website is learnnowlearnwell.com. And then there you can find information about my online courses. You can sign up for those phrases of the week that I mentioned earlier. And I'm, like I said, I'm more than happy to respond to any questions that you have further going forward. And finally, again, I just want to say thank you all for the opportunity to present today. I'm really honored and humbled by your invitation. And I really appreciate the fact that I'm able to help out today.
Same here, Joel. Thank you. Dear participants, the
Thank you,
link to
Joel.
feedback form has been posted in the group. Kindly fill your suggestions are valuable. Kindly fill it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
With the permission of chair, I
Thank you all.
declare that the program is.
That's going to be extremely.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Break it down into sections. You have the body, that's the air.